Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Avondale's Employee Ownership webinar. My name is Kevin Uphill, and I'm the Chairman of Avondale Corporate. I hope you're all well, despite the difficulties in the marketplace. I'm also your host today for the webinar. Now, today we've got about 50 minutes just to explore the subject of employee ownership and why we think it might be centre stage. We'll be having some questions at the end. I've got two other specialists with me. Well, one specialist and one guest, in fact. I'll be introducing in a minute to Eric Keane and also Sue Lawrence in order to discuss the subject of employee ownership trust. Now, for those of you who know Avondale, you'll be aware that we do mergers and acquisitions, but also that we have a management consultancy practice. And within that management consultancy practice, we are looking at productivity, and within that, obviously, COVID-19 backdrop. We've all had a bit of a factory reset, and we're all examining how business models are changing. And one of those areas we've been driving over the last 2 years, in fact, is the employee ownership model. So we thought it might be useful to put a webinar together just to help educate on that. And that is our main goal today, to educate and give ideas on how the model might fit and why it might help you. So, we'll have Q&A. We may heckle ourselves as we go, so please, if you've got questions or observations, just fire them into the questions app that you should see on the screen. We will be sharing the slides, and also the webinar will go up on our website, so if you want to share the recording with anybody, please do so. So Sue Lawrence is our EOT specialist, and she has a background actually as the head of Capita's Trustees. She's also a non-exec directorship. She's got very specialist expertise within employee ownership trust, both in terms of implementing them from a legal point of view, but also from a strategy point of view. There's a lot of people that do employee ownership trust planning, mainly from the tax angle. We're looking at an end-to-end approach, which is legal, tax, financial, but also the strategy behind that. And in particular, we'll hear from Eric about how that might work on for employees and where the employee equation fits. So Sue Lawrence will be talking about the technicalities, and Eric Keane, IFS Limited. We've acted for Eric on a couple of occasions, actually, both selling a company for him, and also recently with IFS Limited, putting it through an employee ownership trust. So we'll be exploring the journey Eric went on, so you've got a real live experience of how it went and the pros and cons, as it were. So to get going, I'll just really give you a bit of backdrop of why we think it's so important and how we think it can fit. Obviously, say COVID-19, bad news, really disruptive and really slowing the economy, significant drag. And I know markets have bounced back a bit, and it's mainly because of the lack of where you can put money elsewhere in terms of getting a yield, but also the amount of government intervention that's going on, which we saw in 2008-9. Our own view is that's probably overvalued, and actually the bad news is still to come as the unfurloughing starts to come through, and we also see some businesses fail in terms of particularly the leisure sector. So you know, one of the things you can do when you've got significant slow economies is to look at productivity. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a great webinar on technology and automation, and we think that is one of the key ways. Can you earn more with less people more effectively? And automation may be a key driver to that. But one of the other equations, of course, is engaging your employees more successfully so that they take more ownership, put more time and effort and care into the equation. And employee-owned businesses are absolutely proven, of course the most famous being John Lewis, to be more productive. So actually, this is not just a talk on exit strategy and how owners can make a difference in terms of their exit strategy and become wealthier. Yes, that's important, but actually employee ownership is a really legitimate business model that can increase the equation in terms of purposeful capitalism, by increasing the productivity per head within a business. And I'm passionate about that. I mean, I've been doing quite a lot of research within the management consultancy with the team there. And actually, the statistics are that for every 5 days that we're open, the Germans produce what we do in 4. Now, you know, maybe that's because we're also more financially services led, therefore it's quite difficult to measure. But you know, employee ownership businesses are more productive, and the statistics bear that out in terms of their growth rate. And with particularly important equation on that, because the government believe it's so important for this productivity, they, from 2014, made them tax effective in terms of an exit strategy for owners. So those of you who are watching the news and tracking it will have seen that entrepreneurs relief has been capped now to only 1 million at 10% from a capital gains tax perspective. So you used to be able to sell a business up to 10 million and get a 10% incentive. Now it's only 1 million. Whereas employee ownership trust, you can still sell a business to employee ownership trust at 0% tax. So that is a really big incentive to look at this model. And the reason is because of this productivity equation. It's good for the shareholders because it creates an exit strategy and a reward for the employees and management. It's good for the employees because they have more engagement, they have more ownership. It's good for the government and the wider economy because the businesses are more successful and more productive. So we see this as sale and succession. Not every business is easily sellable. I mean, you know, we'll hear that a little bit from Eric in a live case shortly. But some companies, and you know, I've been selling companies for nearly 30 years now. Some companies just aren't easily sellable, and employee ownership trust can fit that equation. Also, trade sales can be highly disruptive. You've got new owners coming in. We talk a lot about cultural alignment when we agree deals, and it's not always too easy to assess that. I can remember selling one chain of opticians once, and the guy was involved in the handover. He was going to stay for the next 4 or 5 years and work his handover out. But he phoned me up one day about 6 months afterwards and said, "Kevin, I can't do it. They want cell phones. I want to look after eyes." And, you know, that's a good story around cultural alignment and how we didn't, on that occasion, get the reverse due diligence right on a trade deal. Whereas employee ownership, actually, management and shareholders can become employees, can stay involved. And I think that's really key, that it's a much softer exit. So you do need to change the culture. It needs to become more open, and it needs to be more effectively set up from a delegation and a management perspective. But ultimately, owner managers can stay involved and become employees and join in the journey as the business converts. They don't have to, but that's a really key point, because you know, a business may not today be sale ready, yet you can still do an employee ownership trust. And then go on a journey over 3, 4, 5 years to convert it to a position where it is more team-led, so that ultimately the shareholders get their exit strategy. So in summary, we think this is a really exciting business model. And the reason is because not every business is easy to sell from a trade perspective. The tax incentive at 0%, more flexible, so employees can get ownership, particularly where management buyout teams are also not easy. Historically, management buyouts were very easy to fund, certainly pre-2008-09, become harder to do that sort of leverage management buyout, but also increasingly some managers don't want to sign on the dotted line in terms of the mortgage and the security required. So another big benefit is with employee ownership trust is that the company stands behind any debt relating to structuring the deal rather than directly the employees. So that means we've actually had some people engage in the strategy without directly discussing it with their employees whilst planning it, Clearly, we haven't implemented it until we've discussed it, but certainly from a planning point of view, it can be done confidentially without disrupting them. And then that fourth point, productivity. How can we make our companies more successful in such a tight environment? And can we actually connect employees so that they take more ownership of the business and its evolution, to reduce the burden, if you like, on the owner, manager, shareholders. The statistics are they're more productive, and therefore it's a really exciting way of attacking in terms of that productivity equation. So I'll be back later to sort of chair some questions, etc., and also interviewing Eric. I'm now going to hand over to Sue, who's going to talk to us about sorry, I've got one more point to make. Who's going to talk to us about the technicalities. I have got one other point to make on this backdrop. Obviously, with the COVID-19 element, HMRC are very, very busy, but we're still finding in our experience that they are very happy to look at clearance on this model, and obviously clearance from a revenue point of view to get that 0% is quite critical within the equation of going down this planning route. And we've also, we're on our fifth now. We've been mixing up various different ways to pay for the structures when you convert, because of course shareholders, they still, whilst they want to look at this equation, they still want to get similar money or possibly even on some occasions more money than they would if they did a trade sale. And the model for us is experiencing on three ways to pay. One, we've done a lot more vendor loans recently. I think on Eric's deal, for example, we had a third-party debt offer of a couple of $1 million, but we chose not to go for that because the vendor loans actually create a really good yield. But three ways to pay for it: third-party debt, distributor reserves, and vendor loans. And I think, from that point of view, that's really important in terms of getting the same sort of money out of it as you might if you were to compare to a trade deal. We've actually had a question come in on that as we go, which is, do HMRC need to agree the valuation? And the answer is yes. Now, our experience with that is that HMRC are quite soft on their assessment of value. And that's simply because, well, I think most people today know that multiples of EBITDA are the typical valuation method, and it's very difficult for HMRC to comment on company A versus company B in the SME market. Within reason, we've had no issues pushing through the valuations to get clearance, and so they're very friendly towards this environment. Over to you to talk about key aspects, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Morning, everybody. As Kevin's mentioned, I work with him on implementing EOTs. I'm also an independent director, an independent trustee on a number of appointments, including Eric's EOT at IFS. Just a bit of background really about why these have become so popular, and Kevin's already touched on this a bit. In 2014, the legislation changed and two things were brought in. One was the capital gains tax relief that's already been mentioned. Yep. And the other one is the employee tax-free bonus, which enables employee owners to get up to £3,600 per year tax-free. You still have to pay the national insurance on it, but it's tax-free. So those two things drove a huge increase in the number of EOTs that were implemented. Kevin, let's start with the first slide. Kevin, can we have the next slide? Oh, thanks. Okay. I'm not going to read through these slides. They will be shared with you afterwards, and I'm sure you're all capable of reading them yourselves. So just to pick up on a few points, really. Kevin mentioned the alternative to a management buyout. As he said, a management buyout, your management are going to have to find additional funds to support that. With this model, you can get the funds out of the company itself. So you've got a successful business, then you can put in place a vendor loan through that structure. One thing to note though, for an EOT to be valid, at least 51% of those shares have to be transferred to the employees. It can be up to 100%, and it was 100% in Eric's case IFS. But you'll hear mention sometimes of a hybrid model, and that's where there is a majority percentage owned by employees and the rest is owned by a different structure. Sometimes still held by shareholders. I'm working with another client where the shareholders still own 20 to 40%, and over time they'll gradually transfer that to the business, that they recognise that the business couldn't afford to take on all of it at the same time. But you'll see different models and different variations, and they can be tailored for the individual requirements of a particular company. The other point there on options as well, key staff, family, current shareholders retain gain partial ownership. I've touched on that. But if you're thinking of transferring your business and a member of your family works in that business, maybe your children work in the business, but that you don't want to transfer ownership to them, they can't benefit from the employee ownership. So they wouldn't be eligible for the 3,600 tax relief. They wouldn't be an employee owner with the rest of the employees. So it's just something to bear in mind. I think the reasoning behind that is because you've taken money out of the business and you can share it directly with your children. They don't get it twice. The touch there on options, 12 months qualifying, is in relation to new staff. They don't have to automatically become employee owners. They can if you want them to, but you've got up to 12 months, so you can put that within your trustee to cover that. And I'll touch a bit later about sort of the different criteria for how the bonuses can be calculated. So really just moving to setting up. Kevin's mentioned financial valuations. The financial valuation is quite light touch compared to other alternatives, but it should be remembered that that financial valuation is also used for calculation of the vendor loan. So as a trustee, for example, where I've been appointed onto a trust board, we use that valuation to monitor the payments of the vendor loan and the repayments of it. So it's quite important to have that correct at the outset. It is seen by HMRC, that the question that came through, they do see it, they don't necessarily challenge it, but that you do have to be very open with it, and it does have to make sense. Employee consultation. Some people ask me at what stage should you bring the employees into the discussion. Sometimes you do it straight away. It depends on the structure of your business, how close you are to your employees. Do you want to share it with your management team? Have you even got a management team to share it with? I've spoken to some people who, I had one conversation with somebody about 6 months ago. They were in an open plan office, they owned the business, they were very open about what they were doing, and during the conversation he mentioned that everybody sitting around him, all the employees, were fully aware of it, even though he hadn't actually done anything tangible to move it forward yet. Other people would rather the employees didn't know about it, because once it gets implemented, there is no difference to the day job of the employees. So why would you get them nervous? The last thing you want is employees being nervous and not being able to focus on their role. So it's up to the individual company about how you do it and when you do it. Working with Avondale as well, we have a whole process around integration and implementation, starting with the decision-making process. Is this right? Is there an alternative? Would you do a third-party loan? Would you even think about selling it to somebody else? So that initial thought process is quite important, because that's the foundation from what it grows from. Then moving forward, don't assume that once your decision has been made, you've moved it forward, you've got HMRC approval in place, and you're heading rapidly towards signing the documents and moving on, that actually it finishes at that date. You have a transition period after it's implemented, for it to go through to be fully owned by the employees. I was at the employee ownership conference last November time. I was chatting to some employees, and they were saying that they don't feel like they own the company until that vendor loan is fully paid off. So I'd always see it as a transition period from closing of the deal. It's moved to employee ownership, but it's not fully owned until the vendor loan is totally gone. Next slide, Kevin.
So whilst I change, we've had a couple of questions coming in. Is there a minimum size of business, sales and profits for EOTs?
Yeah, there's nothing definitive other than the number of employees, and you have to have at least 5 employees to benefit from the tax-free bonus. But other than that, there's nothing else. Obviously, your cash flows, your financials of the business really need to be able to support this. And that's why the financial valuation, the financial modelling right at the outset is quite important, because it will help you make your decision about whether this works. And it can be anything from 5 employees up to, John Lewis, you've mentioned thousands of employees. It works for any size, really. There is a ratio you have to look at, though, of shareholders versus employees, which is 2 to 4. If, say, you have 6 employees, you need at least 4 employees for every 2 shareholders. So you have to work on that calculation, but obviously the larger the company, the less that applies.
And how long does it take to do the planning?
Yeah, it can be sort of, you can implement it sort of 2 to 3 months if you've got all your ducks in a row, your financials are clear, you've made the decision, or you can take as long as you like. It depends on the company, it depends on that plan and how you want to implement it. And I think that's key, having that plan, deciding what you need to do. Some companies don't even have a management team, it's fully run by the shareholder. So you have to think about that first, because you can't implement it really without somebody running the company. Touching on that as well, sort of this chart here sort of gives you an overview of what it looks like afterwards from a legal perspective. The company is still sitting there right in the middle, still has a board of directors and a management team. They operationally run the business all the time. The trustees don't do that. The board of directors continues to do that with the management team supporting them. And just as an aside, a lot of professional services companies have transferred to this model in the last couple of years. One thing to note of that, if you're structured as an LLP, you need to transfer into being a limited company first, so that you have the shares that you can transfer to the employees. Sitting above the company then, you have the employee ownership trust with a trustee board of directors. It's an oversight role, they're the shareholders. I'd equate it to shareholders in a listed company going to the AGM every year, challenging the company. You're closer to the business, you're aligned to the business, you all want it to be successful for the same reasons. But it is an oversight role, and they are there to ensure the board of directors is setting the strategy and moving forward and keeping the business on track. And you're working on behalf of the employees. It's a fiduciary responsibility. Every decision that the trust board makes has got to be for the benefit of the employees, whatever that may be. But actually the trust board doesn't have a day-to-day role. As I mentioned, the company still does that. So they're one step removed. The trust board itself can be made up of any combination of people you like. It could be fully employees. You could have an independent director. You don't have to have an independent director, but it sometimes helps to have that person that doesn't know the business inside out sitting on that board. And then normally you'd have an employee representative and management representative, although I do know one company that only has independents with no employees on it, and it sort of doesn't really follow the ethos of the business. This slide here sort of gives you a few more of the advantages for both the employees and the lender. The shareholder can retain interest in the business, they can stay working in the business, and the success of the business is really important to them ongoing, but they don't necessarily have to, they can walk away. The one thing to note, so I think Kevin picked up on this as well, it's less likely than a trade sale to have any change to the business. It's less disruptive to the employees, it's less disruptive to the day job. It's more likely to continue the ongoing success of the business, and if you add on the increased productivity, then it's really beneficial for the business. Kevin mentioned John Lewis, other names that have transferred recently, probably heard of Richer Sounds transferred, Aardman Animations, have been a lot going through. It's a very buoyant market, partly because of that tax relief and partly because of the transfer of the ethos of the business. Kevin, next slide. Just to round up the last slide here, it's just some stats for you. These are from the Employee Ownership Association. It's worth looking at their website if you want a bit more information, but I'll leave these with you because they're quite useful to reflect on if you're considering this route. And I would note as well, part of this is hearts and minds, transferring it to the employees. Working with Eric on his, it's very interesting, and I'll hand over to Kevin and Eric in just a second, that it was very clear at one point that Eric's whole body language and language in the way he ran the business changed quite quickly. He embraced this very early on and has really seen the benefit of it. And I think you'll see that from this interview as well. Kevin, unless there's any other questions, I'll hand over to get the real life story from Eric.
Yeah, we do have some more questions, but I'll bring Eric into the equation, and maybe we can chat some of those questions over also within the interview bit. We have got a Q&A. There's quite a lot of questions firing in actually, so obviously technical subject, but don't forget we've got Q&A at the end, 10-15 minutes. We also have a really good guide on our website, which has been put together by Sue, legal teams and ourselves, just really to answer the key questions. But welcome, Eric. I hope you're well, and thank you for joining us on this. So you've been through the journey, and your body language changed in the journey as well. So I'm pleased to hear that.
Blood pressure's gone down.
Exactly. I mean, some questions for me, really. Why you went through a trade sale previously, and then you went down the EOT route with your next company a little bit earlier, I know, than you'd originally planned as well. So, what appealed to you about it? Why did you do it?
Well, obviously, everybody trying to sell their business wants to get the maximum value for it, and I think some businesses lend themselves more to trade sales than other businesses. I think when we had the IT managed services business, I guess we could have done an EOT, but it was a very and highly competitive marketplace, as you know, to acquire that type of business. So we didn't go that route. In the case of the EOT, I think the nature of your business and the type of products and services that you're supplying will really determine what's the best route to maximize your value. And I think in our case, in IFS, I don't think our business is unusual, but particularly quirky. We're very much built around the supply of one supplier supplies us. So making a trade sale wouldn't have been very easy. We would have needed their agreement on that. Our business is not recurring revenue. It tends to be very lumpy up and down. And I think therefore within that, there's a heavy engagement of long-term employees within it. Our supplier obviously wants to see continuity. So how do we get, as the owners, maximum value? It is through the EOT process. It absolutely delivers all of those things: continuity for the suppliers, continuity with the customers, and an excellent exit strategy for us.
And Eric, within that, you did all the planning and then started to talk to staff. And I'm going to try and address two questions here. One that's coming from a delegate. But the big question was, how did the employees engage in it, and what was their reaction? There is also the question: does it have to be 5 employees, or is that just the minimum?
I saw that question. I think, so far as I am aware, it has to be all the employees. But I'll come to that one in a second. But what we did is, the point in which we engaged with the team was, we engaged with the management team. So we didn't really have a management team as such. We're a 28 staff company, SME, 10 million annual sales. And therefore, in order to make this a success, we need to have a proper management team. So part of the strategy leading up to it was to pick the best of the bunch. We already knew who they were, and enlighten them as to what our plan is, but also incentivize it for them to help deliver it. So really let them step up into these management roles, redefine their roles slightly, and really support them and give them lots of assistance to be making decisions and helping them make decisions. And it initially is a slightly daunting prospect, because often we don't think people are always capable of certain things. We don't always know that until we unleash them and let them give them more responsibility. And to that extent, when we started this process, we got 5 key people in our business, really got them to buy into the process. And as I say, we incentivized it for them as well. which is a financial incentive, of course. And of course, you do start with an initial degree of skepticism and head scratching, not quite sure about it, until you go right through the point where I now have several of them saying, I really didn't quite get it, but I really do get it now. I really do feel empowered now to carry out my role. So we didn't tell the whole team of people. We only told those that management team, because they're absolutely necessary in delivering it. The rest of the people, of course, it happens, and they're told the benefits of it. And of course, initially, some people think it's a good thing, some people are not quite sure about it. And what we also did, we made sure at the end of the first year, we absolutely made sure we paid a profit share bonus that wouldn't have been the case had there not been an EOT. So people saw a direct benefit in their pocket, and they began to see over the months more direct benefits where they see a whole new level of engagement and involvement. And of course, it will sort out we know we all carry a few bits of dead wood in our businesses, and there's always going to be a few moaners and groaners, but in the main, everyone is really engaged with it.
Okay, well, I like that, the moaners and groaners, but actually, we've had another sort of question coming in, Eric. I remember you actually spotted the opportunity for your business and phoned me up and said, Kevin, what's this? Didn't we? But we've had some employees looking to drive it, but more often we find it's shareholder owners planning it and then announcing it to the staff and employees. And invariably, you need a core team that are on board. But of course, as Sue will tell us, that it does need to be all employees are benefiting from the trust. You can put a rule that they can't join for a year, but it's almost like being a pension. You own the business in the trust, almost as a pension for the benefit of the employees. So have you had any problems explaining the concept to staff? Because it is, as Eric said, it's tough.
Yeah, it is. It's a difficult concept, especially for a lot of people who don't really think the way a company runs. They're not interested really. They're just happy doing the day job. I think interesting. We've had people say, "Do I have to be involved?" And the answer is really, well, why wouldn't you? You don't have to do anything. You just get the benefit from it. And apologies, I mentioned this sort of 5 employee rule. It is all employees. It's just a minimum of 5 employees. So if you've got a very small company, that's where that applies. I think Eric did a very good job as well. What he put together was a lot of Q&As that he sent to staff, overthinking what people might ask. Yeah, and I think we had one of the questions, I can't remember it with you, Eric, or with another company, but somebody asked whether it would impact on their pension. And the obvious answer is, why would it? But for them, that was quite important.
People are obviously, I guess what you've got to try and do is put yourself in their shoes. Your employees aren't entrepreneurs. They're not business owners, have never been business owners. You don't think they think like you. So imagine that you are in their shoes, that suddenly you've been told, oh, you are a beneficial owner of this company. What does that mean to me? Does it mean I can give myself a pay rise? Does it mean I can go home early? What does it mean to me? What does it mean? Does it mean I'm going to be responsible for debts of the company? So to allay people, but I suppose think the lowest common denominators, think everything that people are probably going to ask. And we preempted that, as Sue says, by sending a Q&A out with our information pack, preempting the sort of questions that we think people might ask, but also inviting any question, inviting everybody in any question. And of course, the very interesting thing going forward is often when people come to you with problems, always my reply is, how do you want to deal with this? We're all working towards positive outcomes in everything that we do. So how will you deal with this to bring about a positive outcome? Now, I suppose we should be doing that anyway in our businesses, of course, but I find from my own perspective, going from the owner to being the seller and still being the managing director, I'm very, very much handing things back to people all the time in a way that I wasn't before, that's for sure. And not just clearing my desk of it, but then helping them manage that outcome. And it's been enlightening, very enlightening.
But Eric, you're very good at that. You know, my command and control mindset might struggle a bit. You know, do you have any worries? You know, do you sleep better at night knowing that they're doing it?
I've got complete faith in them, and also they do come and ask me the bleeding obvious, but that's fine because I encourage them to do that. Often they just need reassurance, and I suppose it's a test for you as the previous owner of the business. Can you now be the leader of the business? I think there is a distinct difference. You know, when it's your baby and you developed it, you are the owner, it's yours. Now you've got to become the leader, and those people, they are the owners, but they do look for leadership. And I think that's where you really do have to take a long, hard think about how will you run this business to make the EOT a success. Because unless you're being paid all of the money out day one, the likelihood is you're going to have vendor loans in the business, as we have got, and you've got to make that business a success. But in my belief, you won't make it a success by running it in the way you ran it before. You've got to get these people running the business. You've got them.
Eric, we had an on the vendor loan front. We ought to talk about civils as well and how they might affect this. But Eric, you had an offer of a third-party debt on the strategy we employed, but you decided just to do the vendor loan. Why?
Well, I think our view is we didn't want to, at that time, we had good cash in the business. We built the cash to a point where it made it possible to do this. You know, a lot of people say, oh my God, business is terrible and everything. We've got to sell the business. Well, you know, you sell stock, you sell shares when the price is good. So, you know, make sure you get your business into a good position. As best as you can. So we'd rather have, we didn't really want to put at that stage a loan against the company. So we're just really being cautious, I think.
And I mean, the benefit of a vendor loan, of course, is it's a promise to pay the way we structure it. So it didn't sit on a balance sheet and affect the credit rating.
Indeed.
And also, if there are cash flow issues, you're getting a great yield, but ultimately the loan would just kick out over a longer period. So, I
think there is an opportunity to get a loan further down the line. Of course, you can get it at the beginning of it if you want, but I think that you've just got to be careful and cautious in the way you approach it. And this is a shared reward scheme. You've got to make sure that obviously you're getting your value for having sold your business, but because you are bequeathing it to your employees, you've got to show them that there's some value in what they're getting. And although it might be a long route of repayment, a long time, people have got to see that there is a tangible benefit. If it just is something that's never ever going to happen and they never actually own it, then they won't believe in it, and you've got to keep them believing in it.
I think that's an important point. I mean, we've had the question, did you sell 100%? But we've also had the question, can you resell these businesses? I mean, I want to touch on the reselling. I know people can make employee ownership trusts sound complicated. Actually, the strategy of engaging the staff is the planning, isn't that complicated. It's involved, but it's not complicated. To a certain extent, it's more friendly than a trade sale. But we think that these businesses, it's a relatively newish model. There's 370 according to the Employee Ownership Association. They're worth a look, by the way. They've got some good guides and stuff like that. But we don't think that they're going to be easily resold. It's
Indeed.
more where businesses are being put into employee ownership trust, probably more in perpetuity. It's not ruled out, but it's more likely that these businesses are going to stay in that format for the next 20, 30 years. And that's, again, one of the key reasons the government are looking at it. Owner-managed businesses tend to have a life cycle following owners. Here, it becomes more of a tag team. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think if anyone's considering whether they do an EOT or a trade sale, having done both, I would tell you that completing an EOT is much, much easier than a trade sale. I've done 3 trade sales of different companies, and each time they are fraught with not impossible, but they have difficulties. And there's always negotiations right up to the last minute. Money gets taken off the table. Warranties get put in that you didn't agree. They are fraught with difficulties. And on my last sale, and Kevin will know this, we spent 9 months talking to one company and pulled out. And of course, during that time, that stress takes your eye off the ball of a number of things. And then when you want to try and sell to someone else, it can affect your value. EOT is you're keeping it within your own camp. You're dealing, you agree what the valuation is. You get it approved by HMRC. The process is really, really simple, and it's stress-free. It's very simple.
I think that's important with the revenue post-COVID, that we think that they're going to be, able to take more of a view on COVID finance interruption as well, in terms of that model and that valuation. So another reason why we think employee ownership trust may be easier in some circumstances than a trade sale. So I've had the question in on what percentage is appropriate for a vendor loan, but also, what's the impact of civil loans on EOTs? Either thinking about doing it or companies that have done it. As a trustee, I think you've probably had this question come in live from some of your companies that are employee owned.
Yeah, and I think I've looked at civil loans from both sides, both lending and borrowing. I'm working with somebody else who lends under it. I think one of the criteria for it is it can't be used for paying off shareholder debt or shareholder loans. So I think it'd be quite difficult to incorporate that and implement an EOT. Eric was very lucky in his timing. Well, we're all unlucky in what's happened, but lucky in his timing in that he can now get that benefit as a live company. But yeah, you need to sort of think about that, and also any loans that you've got outstanding will impact on your financial modelling right at the outset. So you've got to look at your financials as a whole when you're pricing this up from your own perspective, and also bear in mind that the vendor loan is a debt of the company once it's in place. It has to be paid out of the cash flow of the business. So you're adding on to that, and I think that's one of the things I see as a trustee, which is the shareholders who've got the vendor loan, they're no longer shareholders. They've stepped away from the company. Well, if it's 100% transfer, they've stepped away from the company. They're now a third-party lender. They're not a driver of the business, other than in their day job if they're still working within the company. So it has to be seen as if it's just another loan of the company and monitored that way.
There are lots of other unintended. Well, there are lots of other benefits that you don't always consider. I mean, I noticed one of the questions there says, are employees obliged to return shares when they leave the business? Well, my understanding is as everyone is a beneficial owner, they get one share in the business after 12 months. And if they leave the business, they give that share up. They can't sell that share and they can't take it with them. So it is a benefit of being part of this team. I mean, that's another thing. I don't call out people employees. I refer to them always as a team. And that's a cultural change, definitely. And colleagues, it's a bit Waitrose, I suppose, but that tends to be what the way you work. But I also notice, the other thing I've noticed is when we're advertising for any recruitment, we're able to say, we are an employee-owned business, and people are attracted to that. they're very attracted to that. And you know, we've been held up in our sector as, wow, look what IFS did. You know,
I think that's very important. We've got some companies looking at this as part of, particularly again, government sector. If you're pitching into government sector, you know, it can be a key sort of tendering device, can't it? It can be very useful for that. So
picking up on a couple of those points. Sorry, Kevin, I was going to say Eric's mentioned a couple of things there. One, the shares. Yeah, the employees don't own the shares; they're owned by the trust. They just get the benefit of the shares, so they don't have to return them. And also, he mentioned the word sector, and I see there's a question that's come through. This is sector agnostic. It works for any sector. Some sectors have seen it more prevalent. Professional services have picked up on this quite a lot. There's a lot of architect firms that have moved into this model. So I think once you see, I think Eric's company was the first in their sector to do this. I know there's been a lot of interest across the sector following on from that. So it seems to flow after the first one.
And so just a question on trustees, you know, and it comes back to a point I made earlier. We've got two questions. We've got one, how easy is it to find trustees? And you can put your hand up and say me, but you've got others that we can work with. But what happens? I mean, for me, key management are running the business, but they haven't done an MBO, so they haven't got any of that stress and threat. You know, why are they going to work that much harder? And can they set their salaries? You know, let's say, I mean, in IFS, let's say Eric does decide to retire. You know, he's got a large garden now. You know, it's time to do the gardening. You know, can they set the salary? What's the trustees' view on that? And how do they benefit?
Set the salary of the management team.
Yeah, so can the management team set their own salary? You know, so vendor loans are all gone. You know, they're now running the business. You know, 3,600 tax effective. Yeah, that's great. But you know, for the senior management, they're taking more of the stress. Where's the real key benefit for them? Particularly if it's not going to be refunded. You know.
Yeah. In theory, they can set their own salary, but obviously they've got a business to run, and the business has got to be successful. The trustee team has oversight of that, so they, like any shareholder, they could turn it down, they could work against it. And in theory, and certainly in the trustees that I've seen, the board of directors is appointed by the trustees, so it would have to be approved by the trustees and really supported and reflected in the financials of the business. So you don't really get the same issue that you get with the big listed companies, where huge big salaries are being paid out, because if the business can't support it, they're not going to get it. And the benefit coming out of the business isn't a huge big dividend going to people, it's the bonus going to the employees. But yeah, the trustee in theory has oversight of the board, but in my view, that should be light touch, because you want the board and the management team to be effectively making the business successful. You don't want to be all over them, stopping them doing things, because that would be bad for business, therefore bad for everybody. And I think there's been some questions there as well on post-implementation. I think a lot of people, when they talk about this, they talk about coming up to the implementation date. Post-implementation is just as important. It's a transition for the whole business. It doesn't happen overnight, so you have to embrace it and make it happen. So I'm working with somebody at the moment. They've been planning it for 2 years. It's been delayed by a year. We're really using that next year to make sure that we're implementing it well and starting to do some of the work for the first year as well. So we're bringing the transition further forward.
Well, I'd like to draw to a close, if that's okay, Sue and Eric. I really appreciate your time this morning. We've actually had more questions than we could actually answer, which is great engagement from all the participants. I'm told actually, but the sound is dropping a bit. So hopefully in the recording you might pick up aspects, but also what we will do, if we haven't answered your question, we will come back to each of you individually on those questions. We'll do a sort of FAQ response when we respond back to everyone that's joined in. I hope you can see the sort of benefit. I know it's an unusual model, but actually this business model can make more sense than the owner-managed model. Problem with the owner-managed model is it depends on the age profile and energy levels of the shareholders driving that business forward, whereas this can be much more, and I think Eric's word of team is important. It can be much more team-orientated, which shares the burden, increases productivity as we've discussed, but also, you know, there are, with the right structure, it can work really in significant alignment with shareholders in terms of selling out and getting similar to the sort of total value that they would on a trade basis. And we do all that work. Of course, there's, you know, we charge as a percentage. So if anyone's interested, we're happy to just chew the fat. We don't charge up front, and we'll explore the equation, because each situation's different from a quotation point of view. But I think one other benefit for me with owner managers, you know, I said I've been selling companies for 30 years, and I think one of the issues when you do a trade sale, you know, the research is that vendors do get grief. And by grief, I mean they're not used to the fact that they're no longer considered important, and they don't get emails every day. Here, there's an option that can create a much softer intellectual involvement in the business in order to create a legacy. So there's a lot of elements that, if you get in alignment, it's a really exciting strategy, both for the business and the employees from a productivity point of view, but for the shareholders on that exit strategy. So please join us also. We're doing more of these webinars. We've got another one coming up called the M&A Summit, and that's coming up, I forget the date, hang on a minute, 2nd of June, mergers and acquisitions in the post-COVID age. And then we've got one on the 11th of June, living on thin air. So M&A, yeah, what's happening with valuations, who's doing deals, living on thin air, again, back to technology and ideas. You know, productivity isn't just about being hours at the desk, it is about the ideas. And hopefully today, going back to that, we've had a factory reset, it's been enforced, but if we're going to have a reset, let's attack back and look at our business model and convert it to one that's more effective. Hopefully Employee Ownership Trust could be one of those for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.